Have you ever wondered why cooperation exists in a world that seems so competitive? Picture yourself in a world where every decision you make can either lead to your ultimate success or your disastrous downfall. Welcome to the fascinating world of game theory, a mathematical framework where individuals or players make strategic decisions. Now let's dive into a classic scenario known as the prisoner's dilemma. Imagine two individuals locked away in separate cells, unable to communicate but facing the same dilemma: to betray the other for personal gain or to stay silent and hope for mutual cooperation. The paradox here is mind-boggling. Individual rationality, the pursuit of one's own best interest, could lead to collective irrationality where everyone ends up worse off. So, in a world that often seems like everybody for themselves, how does cooperation even stand a chance? Now, what if we told you that cooperation might be much more logical than it seems? Imagine you and a friend commit a crime, but the police can't prove it unless one of you confesses. Welcome to the world of the prisoner's dilemma, a classic thought experiment in game theory. Let's paint a picture. You and your partner in crime are held in separate cells, unable to communicate. The police offer you both a deal. You can either stay silent or spill the beans. Here are the possible outcomes. If both of you keep mum, you'll each get a minor sentence of 1 year for a lesser charge they can pin on you. Let's call it obstruction of justice. However, if one of you confesses while the other stays quiet, the confessor will walk free, rewarded for their cooperation with the police, while the silent one gets a hefty 5-year sentence. And what if both of you decide to betray each other and confess? Well, the police won't need your cooperation anymore and you'll both end up with a 3-year sentence. So what's the smart move? The pressure is on. If you trust your friend to stay silent, it's best for you to do the same. But what if they betray you? It's enough to make your head spin, right? This is the crux of the prisoner's dilemma. It's a paradox where individuals acting in their own self-interest can end up worse off than if they'd cooperated. It's a situation where betrayal seems like the safest option. But is it really? In this single-round game, the temptation to defect is strong. It's a game of trust, or lack thereof. But remember, life isn't a single round game. Our actions have consequences that often circle back to us. Quite a pickle, isn't it? But what if this scenario repeats itself? Now imagine playing this high-stakes game over and over with the same person. This is where we step into the realm of iterated prisoner's dilemma. It's the same game, but the dynamics change significantly when you're playing multiple rounds. Let's dive into this fascinating world. Instead of a one-off encounter, think of it as an ongoing relationship. Every decision you make, every move you play echoes into the future rounds. You're not just thinking about the immediate payoff, but also about the long-term consequences. Sounds a bit like real life, doesn't it? So, what happens when the prisoner's dilemma is played repeatedly? Well, it introduces a new element to the game. The possibility of retaliation. If you betray me this round, maybe I'll betray you in the next. Or perhaps if you cooperate with me this time, I'll return the favor later. Suddenly, the game isn't just about maximizing your own payoff, but also about predicting and influencing your opponent's future actions. But here's where it gets even more interesting. The iterated prisoner's dilemma allows for the emergence of strategies. Maybe you decide to always cooperate until your opponent betrays you, then retaliate. This is known as tit for tat. Or perhaps you opt for a more forgiving approach, cooperating most of the time but occasionally retaliating to keep your opponent in check. There's a whole universe of strategies out there, each with its own strengths and weaknesses. And the best part, cooperation becomes a viable strategy. In a single game, the temptation to betray might be too strong, but in an iterated game, where your actions can come back to haunt you, cooperation can actually lead to higher payoffs in the long run. Yes, even in a world as cutthroat as the prisoner's dilemma, cooperation can emerge victorious. So it turns out in this world of ours, you might meet the same person twice. And when you do, the choices you make can have far-reaching consequences. The plot indeed thickens. But how does this apply to the real world, you ask? Well, let's step out of the prison cell and into the wild with a concept called evolutionary game theory. This theory takes the principles of game theory and applies them to populations of organisms over generations. Imagine a world where organisms can choose to be either selfish or cooperative. The selfish ones always take the biggest piece of the pie, while the cooperators are willing to share. Now, if we were to play a one-off game, the selfish ones would obviously win. But life isn't a one-off game. It's a series of interactions, much like the iterated prisoner's dilemma. Here's the twist. In the long run, organisms that cooperate tend to have a higher chance of survival. Why? Because cooperation can lead to benefits that increase the chances of survival and reproduction. Think of a herd of buffalo fending off predators or a colony of ants working together to build an anthill. These are examples of cooperation leading to survival benefits. But what about the selfish organisms? Won't they just take advantage of the cooperators? This is where the concept of reciprocity comes in. If an organism is known to be selfish, others might stop cooperating with it, and it could end up worse off. On the other hand, an organism that is known to cooperate can attract more cooperation from others, leading to mutual benefits. So, over generations, cooperative behavior can propagate through a population. The cooperators might not win every game, but they have a higher chance of winning the ultimate game, survival. This is how evolutionary game theory can explain the prevalence of cooperation in nature. This doesn't mean that the world is a utopia of cooperation. There are still plenty of selfish organisms out there, but it does suggest that cooperation is not just a nice to have, it's a survival strategy. So cooperation might just be the secret sauce for survival after all. Now let's look at some age-old teachings that seem to echo these scientific findings. Circling back a few centuries, we find the Russian Peter Kropotkin advocating for a theory that feels uncannily familiar. Kropotkin's mutual aid theory proposed that cooperation within a species is not just beneficial, but critical for survival. He argued that creatures that assist one another rather than compete have a better chance of thriving. This theory, formulated in the late 19th century, predates game theory but echoes the principles we've just explored. Let's hop over to another part of the world and a completely different era. Jesus of Nazareth, a figure pivotal to many, preached a doctrine of love, kindness, and most importantly, forgiveness. He taught that forgiveness wasn't just good for the soul, but also for society. By forgiving others, we create an environment of trust and cooperation, where grudges don't escalate into feuds and where love can flourish. Now you might be wondering, what does this have to do with the iterated prisoner's dilemma or evolutionary game theory? Well, quite a bit, as it turns out. Kropotkin's mutual aid theory mirrors the benefits of cooperation we saw in the iterated prisoner's dilemma. The more we cooperate, the better our collective outcome. And if we recall Jesus' teachings on forgiveness, we find a similar echo in evolutionary game theory. Here, forgiveness is akin to not retaliating or tit-for-tat strategy, which, as we've seen, can lead to more favorable outcomes in the long run. So it seems that science and ancient wisdom were both hinting at the same truth. Cooperation, not competition, is the key to collective survival and prosperity. From the animal kingdom to human societies, from Kropotkin's observations to Jesus' teachings, and right up to modern scientific theories, the message is clear and consistent. It seems science and ancient wisdom might be on the same page after all. So, what's the takeaway from all this? We've taken a deep dive into the fascinating world of game theory, navigated the murky waters of the prisoner's dilemma, and journeyed through the twists and turns of iterated games. We've explored the survival strategies of evolutionary game theory and found, quite unexpectedly, that cooperation can indeed be a winning strategy. The teachings of Jesus and Kropotkin's mutual aid theory gave us further food for thought. They both underscored the power of forgiveness and mutual aid, reinforcing our findings that cooperation, though seemingly counterintuitive in a competitive world, can be the most rational and beneficial strategy. In a world that often seems to reward the ruthless and the cunning, let's not forget the power of cooperation. It's not just about survival of the fittest, but also about survival of the kindest, the most cooperative. Next time you find yourself in a dilemma, remember, cooperation might just be your winning move.